Today, I'm talking to Alexandria Richards, who is a recent Drexel grad and the very first African American editor in chief of the Drexel Law Review. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Break into Law School. I am your host, Lavetta Jenkins. Welcome, Alexandria.
Hi, Lavetta. Thank you so much for having me today.
Uh, it is a pleasure to have you, and congratulations on your graduation.
Mhm.
So, why not tell us all a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So, as you alluded to, I am a recent graduate of Pennsylvania Law School, Drexel University, and am hoping to go into labor and employment practice after I pass the bar. That's what I'm going to be jumping into in the next couple of weeks. But I guess a little bit about my story and leading up to law school is I actually wanted to come to law school to practice family law. I just had a personal connection to it, and that's what drove me to come to law school. And then upon arriving, I kind of learned that there was a lot about the law that I didn't know. And because of that, I wanted to explore other options before like closing any doors that could be beneficial to me. And through some internships, as well as my involvement in law review, I found out that I really enjoy labor and employment as a topic and kind of went from there. So that's where I am now.
So you started off wanting family and you ended up in labor and employment. What was it that sparked you to choose this path over family?
I really enjoy policy work, and I think that labor and employment, especially with the recent changes in the workforce that came out of COVID, and more people becoming entrepreneurs, especially minorities becoming entrepreneurs, that labor and employment issues are more in the public eye than they ever have been or that they have been in the most recent years. So I just wanted to be involved eventually in labor policy on both sides of the coin. Like, I think it's about time that there were laws that protected employers. At the same point in time, I understand that employers have business interests that they're interested in protecting, but there is a way to kind of strike that balance where workers feel protected, but also employers feel like their business interests are protected too.
I love that you actually thought about, you know what, there's policies going on here and I need to be able to work on both sides to make sure that everybody gets the fair deal. I don't know if everyone even thinks about the company when they think of labor and employment. We more so think of union workers or, just the hourly worker or somebody who's salaried but burning themselves out. And we don't often think about how one decision that might be better for the union will affect the company that has the workers. We don't always think about that. And I think you just gave me pause, like, oh, okay, this is, and it surprised me because I never thought about the company. I've always thought about the workers. So tell me the different sides that you can see with how those two kind of work together, even though they sometimes would seem like they're opposite.
Sure. So I was the same way as you coming into law school and even being interested in this field, kind of thinking when we see labor and employment issues, we always think about the employers. And I think that's because we can relate to the employers. Like at some point in our lives, we've all been employees. And it was through my very first internship, my 1L summer, where I was doing labor and employment research for the firm that I'm like, wait a second, there's another side here. And it doesn't always have to be the scary side or the bad side. Sometimes there are instances where, you have a genuine employer who may have, had a policy that was a little shaky or an employee that or management that acted in a certain way, but they still genuinely want to make sure that their employees are protected. And at the end of the day, they feel like they have a safe workforce. So it was good to see at that specific internship, the attorneys kind of represent businesses that don't fit that stereotype of being the big corporation that wants to take advantage of their employees. And everyone kind of gets to walk away from the table still feeling happy in a certain extent.
I think that that's really good that you thought about, we've all identified with employees. We've all identified with, people who feel like they're overworked and underpaid. But sometimes, like you just said, policies might be shaky or just extremely outdated. If the company started back in 1970 and they never did any employee handbook updating, of course, by today's standards, that seems absurd that you still have me, taking one break and I'm here for 12 or 14 hours. It does seem a little bit shaky. So, being a new grad and you're hoping to go into labor and employment, I've also discovered from doing a little research that you wrote for law review. You did law review writing. Tell me a little bit about that process as well.
Sure. So during my 1L summer, which was the summer of 2022, I wrote on to Law Review and was accepted as a staff editor. And then in my second year, I decided to take on more responsibility and was chosen to be editor in chief of the Law Review. And that holds a special place in my heart because not only is it a complete 180 from the little girl who started law school and was completely scared of all of her classes, but I also am the first Black editor in chief of Drexel Law Review. So it's something I hold very close to my heart and am completely honored that I was able to serve in that capacity during my last year. But during my first year, I wrote on labor and employment issues for my law review note, specifically concerning influencers and content creators, and how they're usually classified as independent contractors when they're employed by these companies to work with them and advertise with them. But that classification takes them out of the ability to unionize and get protection from being protected by a union. And especially where minority content creators come into play, smaller content creators, we're seeing some of them get taken advantage of because there's not a lot of pay transparency in the space because it is kind of new. But at the end of the day, it is a form of advertising. So in my law review note, I did some research about other kind of independent contractor spaces, like the home nurse space, for example, where the state, I believe it was Pennsylvania, stepped in at one point and acted as the employer so that those nursing workers could get protection and be able to unionize and fight for fair wages, working hours, working conditions, etc. And I argue that that could be translated over into the independent contractor space because, you know, we're seeing independent contractors even outside of content creators and influencers through Uber, Postmates, Lyft, entrepreneurs. You know, it really just runs the gamut as people are trying to, you know, take more autonomy over the way that they earn their income. They deserve protection for their working conditions.
Ooh. And you know what? That's something also that did not exist 30 years ago. There was no influencer. There was not a need to protect people who were this big in the, independent contractor industry. There was no ride share. There wasn't, a delivery service like there is now. So of course there had to be somebody younger, thank God for you. There had to be somebody younger who came in to make sure that everybody was being fairly protected. When you mentioned the state of Pennsylvania, we believe, stepping in on behalf of independent home health care workers, what made you even take a look into that as well?
I have to admit, it wasn't my own research. So I thankfully had a advisor helping me write my note who's been practicing labor law for years. And they were able to point me in the direction of some case law and articles that discussed that exact thing happening. And so I kind of just translated it over into my writing.
And when you think about it, those two kind of can go hand in hand because both of you are independent. There is no company governing, but somebody needs to protect the workers.
Absolutely.
I think that the labor and employment industry definitely needs more fresh minds like yourself. You mentioned being the first African American to even write for this. How did you go about getting it? Just because you proved yourself in your writing?
I think it was proving myself in my writing and also as a staff editor, as a first year editor on Law Review, you have other responsibilities, like other editing responsibilities. And I think just by showing initiative, even when I would make mistakes that I wanted to learn, that I wanted to increase my ability to edit, that I was invested in discovering more about legal scholarship, just really showing that initiative that showed to the outgoing board that I could handle the level of responsibility that came with the position.
There's nothing like some good hard work showing that you are worthy of the position and then making the historical decision for them to make you be the very first African American to write for that and to kind of be the editor in chief. So, what were your duties when you were the editor in chief of the Drexel Law Review?
Wow. I mean, it really just ranged from what we were dealing with that week. I like to think of the editor in chief role as a really external facing role, as opposed to some of the other members on the editorial board that really focus on what's happening internally. And by externally, I mean all of the authors that write with us, they communicate only with the editor in chief. So you're kind of the face of the journal to them, whether something that happened was your decision alone or a decision made by another board member. You're the face that they're going to associate with that decision. So being able to kind of deal with happy authors, angry authors, the list goes on, but just being a good face for the journal to authors, professors, and really just focusing on long-term goals for the journal. I think the editor-in-chief has a really good perspective that although we're publishing what we're publishing this year, it impacts way beyond just this volume and this journal, and consistently asking yourself, is this going to be good for us in 3 years, in 5 years down the road? And I've actually seen, because we just like ushered in the new board, I've actually seen the fruits of our labor already. So that's been very rewarding to see. But that's something that's very specific to the editor in chief role and something I really enjoyed.
To be the face of the Drexel Law Review, they sure picked a perfect one. I could not have found someone who was so well educated on their particular topic. I think that you must have put in countless hours making sure that your law review was top tier. How long do you think it took you?
Um, I, for a certain point in time, felt like I eat, slept, and breathed law review. And it was kind of a thing where like I knew what I signed up for. I took it with a smile, and it really has paid off. I've enjoyed the relationships that I've created with the members of my board and faculty members at Drexel, and then also just getting a deeper understanding for how people value their own expertise in research and how you can kind of mesh two people's goals together to get a good outcome that serves both parties. So countless hours, but I always tell everyone, always asks me, like, if you could go back a year, would you do it again? And my answer is always 100% yes, I would do it again.
That's the mark of a good editor in chief. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about you taking on some of the nuanced things and the very new, with influencers and things like that. You took sort of a new approach to law school by starting off online. How was it starting online and then transitioning to in person learning?
Sure. So, on the one hand, starting online felt a little easy because I didn't have to leave home. So, I could keep some of the factors that I could control under my control while I kind of figured out this new thing of law school. So, on that hand, it was kind of easy. On the other hand, which I think didn't become apparent to me until the spring, it did take me a little bit longer to kind of build those relationships with my classmates that maybe would have made studying for finals a little bit easier in my first semester. But I really do hand it to the professors at Drexel who went out of their way to make sure that the students who were coming in the spring that started online in the fall felt welcomed and knew about all of the resources at the school that were available to them. So once I got in person and I met my friends and I, got the lay of the land and where my classes were, it did start to feel a little bit easier.
I thought that that might have been a little bit of a tricky transition
Mhm.
because, you do get a little bit comfortable being at home and, can do whatever you need to do while you're studying. And you don't have to worry about another student or networking or finding a study buddy. But once you get in person, that's altogether different because I'm quite sure they encouraged you to group yourself together and work well together, didn't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's always good to bounce ideas off of your classmates, comparing notes in your first year. That was really useful to me. Just making sure I didn't miss anything during class. Like studying for quizzes together, studying for finals together. And really just even if in situations where neither one of us may have gotten the concept, being there for each other to say, it's okay. Like we'll go to office hours and we'll figure it out. It's okay. Yeah.
I think that some people don't really get that, that even if you both don't know, it's still good to be an encouraging person for somebody else. Hey, listen, I know it might seem a little scary. You don't want to seem like, oh, I don't know, or like you're the only one going to the office hours. Let's go together and then both get the same answer, since we're looking for the same answer to the same question or the workaround for the same thing. I think that partnering up, even when, one person might not want to ask for help, but come on, I'll go with you, it takes the pressure off of them seeming like, oh, I'm the only one who doesn't know. And I thank you for being that person for other people, because the world needs more.
Yeah,
Not everybody knows everything. And sometimes you need a help buddy. Let's go ask for
absolutely.
help together.
Absolutely. There's nothing embarrassing about asking for help, but I understand that it feels embarrassing. And it's
Hmm.
something that I still have to tell myself internally, like, it's okay to ask for help. Yeah.
I think that a lot of people who are kind of, I wouldn't say overachievers, but high achievers, I think that we all kind of feel like, oh, I don't want to ask for help because I don't want it to really seem like I don't know. But you'll never know if you don't ask. And it will always be entirely too heavy to lift by yourself
Mhm.
if you don't ask for help. Do you think that maybe your undergrad studies of psychology helped you with that, to kind of wrap your head around that a little bit better?
I think that's a good point. I think my undergraduate studies in psychology helped me navigate the hallways of law school socially, if you will. Law school, in a way, can be very isolating, especially if you're a first generation student and especially if you're a minority student. It feels like there are secrets that other people know that you may not know, especially as a first year student. Everyone's on more of an equal playing field than they might lead on. And like we've been talking about, just feeling comfortable finding your posse and your group of people that you can be yourself with, and then also asking for help and taking law school as it is and rolling with the punches almost in your first year. So maybe psychology helped me a little bit in understanding that learning curve. Like, I would face that learning curve and I would know how to kind of get over it a little bit easier.
I think so. And I think you did an amazing job at tackling that and making sure that you did it. And then graduating on time, once again, the editor in chief of the Drexel Law Review, the very first African American to do it. I love speaking to young history makers and knowing that, yes, this did exist for all of these years, but just like we here at Barrier Breakers help people get into law school, you broke a barrier and became the very first to do so. How did that feel, going and telling your parents that you were able to do this specific thing?
Yeah, it was a very emotional moment for me. I tell everyone that, when I started at Drexel, I had no idea that I would come to Drexel and make history. But, you just never know the doors that are waiting for you to walk through them. And editor in chief was just one of those for me. I definitely feel like my parents would have been proud of me no matter what I did in law school. But being able to tell them that is a moment I replay in my mind like a lot, because it meant a lot to me and it still does.
I can't imagine having the bragging rights of my daughter was the first ever. That alone is something that I know. Listen, I put it on a shirt and wear it every
Yeah,
single
yeah. My mom is definitely one of those people. When we made my graduation announcement, she definitely was like, "Make sure you put that information in there."
Absolutely. I stand with your mother on that one. So you were talking about law school as a minority. And I know with our upcoming Break into Law School conference, we're going to have you speaking on that, coming in as a minority and making sure that you not only acclimate, but that you also stand in who you are in that space. How were you able to make sure you kept your own voice while, on that track to become the first editor in chief?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is having mentors in my corner who remind me to stay true to myself and show up as myself. I'll never forget a mentor still to this day, Franta Freeman. She's a Drexel alumni. I was connected with her my very first semester. And she was like, I love that you're wearing hoop earrings. I love that you have your nose ring in and you didn't like try to be someone else just because you're meeting me for the first time. She said, I am the first person to show up in a space and say, you're going to accept me as me, or I'm going to go somewhere else that's going to accept me as me. And that conversation has always stuck with me. And I've stayed connected with Fanta because she brings that out in me and makes me feel comfortable to show up in spaces as I am and true to myself. So I really think mentors paving the way for people who come after them to be themselves and reminding the people who come after them to continue to be themselves. It was really what has anchored me in showing up in that way.
Because you don't have to pretend to be your representative if you show up as yourself and fully present and accepting in who you are first before you take yourself to whatever space you're going into. You got to start off with loving who you are. And this is me. And I don't have to be quiet about my person. I can wear my hoops. I can wear my braids. I can still have my nose pierced, or I can wear an afro. We can still show up and do an impeccable job as we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's just been very empowering to see myself grow through that and then be that for Black students at Drexel and other Black law students that I meet, be that representation for them and encourage them to show up as themselves and seize the opportunities they want and go after their dreams. Yeah.
Just as law, the clients who will need certain types of lawyers or certain type of people in the law industry, I feel like as diverse as they are, the lawyers and the people who are handling those things need to be that diverse as well. And you're definitely going to bring a different perspective to labor and employment because you've brought such a different perspective to Drexel and everything that they've already done, and you just put a little bit extra sauce on it, just for yourself. What would you say to someone who maybe has hopes of following in your footsteps?
Mm. The first thing I think I would say is take your time. I took some time off after graduating from my undergraduate program before going to law school, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. Law school is always going to be here for you. There's always going to be a need for lawyers, whether it be in labor and employment or another field that tickles your fancy. So take your time in getting here because the road is tough and it will challenge you and it will ask you to stretch yourself, sometimes to your limits. And you have to make sure that you're up for the challenge to show up for your goals in that way. And I would also say be true to yourself and then don't be afraid to ask for help and put yourself out there in that way.
Putting yourself out there is probably one of the scariest but most beneficial thing you could ever do, whether it's networking or interviewing or even just offering to help, or do you need some assistance over there? I got a free hour, can I help? Those little things definitely add up and make a very big difference. What one little thing would you say as a tip to someone who's probably thinking about law school, but they don't really quite know and they're an undergrad right now? Share any type of tip or maybe even just like a little word of wisdom for someone who's thinking about it, but they're in a totally different field. Like you were in psychology, someone might be in business. Give them a little tip about something they can do if they want to get into law school.
I would say use your network. I would say that the amount of young attorneys, and when I say young, like maybe fifth year of practice and younger, that are waiting to talk to students and give encouragement and have conversations with, grab coffees with, reach out to them and use your network to bounce ideas off of. That's what we're here for. And I think law school has definitely taught me that you sometimes are only as strong as your network. And sometimes it just takes sending an email to say, hey, introducing yourself, making a common connection, and then saying, can I talk to you and pick your brain about this one thing? And it might give you a perspective that you didn't even know you needed, but now you have it because you have a connection.
Ooh, always reach out for that connection, always be networking. Alexandria, I thank you so much for being our guest today and congratulations again on graduating. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvette. It's been great to talk to you. I appreciate it.